Welcome back. Today I want to finish up a little bit of the continuing history on the M16, the AR-15, and I ended up with my last segment on really part 2. I had a segment on part 3 on how to install the Geissele trigger this and that now. But in part 2 I basically got up to the point where the M16 had been implemented in Southeast Asia and Vietnam. I don't want to get too tied up with that. One of the first things that occurred naturally was the introduction of the A1 version, which introduced the chrome line bores. It also modified the buffer tube buffer, so that the buffer was consistent with the type of powder that was being used at the time. Ball powder was a faster burning powder, and it created a quicker cycling rate. So the buffer was more suited. It was perfectly suited to that particular type of powder which was being used. Powders were improved so that the didn't leave the tremendous amount of residue and build up in the carrier keys and in the gas tubes and things like that. So everything had improved by the late 60s, and that's important because you know, I don't like it when I see people write into me that, you know, they so-and-so told them that, you know, everybody died in Vietnam because the guns were not working and all that. That's really not true at all. For the most part, the guns worked absolutely fine. The very earliest versions of them were essentially research and development issues, which were issued far too quickly before you know, problems had been ironed out. But in the course of the McNamara administration, one of the things that he was famous for, and this owes to his technological background. He was a computer nerd, and I mentioned that he was called one of the whiz kids in Washington that you know, President John F. Kennedy had put in his cabinet. So, being a technologically minded person he probably figured it was like a beta, you know, trial period that he would go through and see reports from the field and everything. Maybe that would have worked if it was done honestly. Maybe if reports had come back, you know, that would have been helpful. But I think that there were so many cases where things were being done in actual firefights in combat where there were no actual opportunities to test in that environment except in combat, and that was a very unfortunate circumstance for those who you know, were in those circumstances and died, unfortunately. So I'm very sensitive to that. Being a combat veteran of Vietnam myself, I'm fully aware of those circumstances. But I don't want it to be blown out of proportion or anything like that, because, you know, soldiers were not dopes, and they were very well attuned to what they needed to do in order to, through field expedience. In other words, what is it? You know, we're having a problem. Let's fix it. So some guys didn't get that opportunity because it happened too quickly, and they didn't know. But, you know, people learn, and this happens in all combat environments. It's happened ever since people were throwing axes at each other. So, you know, there's always that period of time when people have to learn in the field, on their feet. But the guns operated essentially very, very well. The next big improvement with the A1 was the fact that it was it was given a 12-inch twist barrel instead of a 14-inch twist barrel. Now, I've heard the folklore, and I've read it very often, that Eugene Stoner purposely put a 14-inch twist barrel on it to destabilize the bullet in flight and to make it tumble and everything. That was the last thing on his mind. The guy was a ballistician extraordinaire. He was inventing a firearm. He was not inventing something that would hurl rocks. And that's essentially what you'd have if you have a destabilized bullet. We had no bullets that ever destabilized in flight. That's a myth. We never had bullets that tumbled on impact. That's a myth. What military bullets do, and it's always been very, very well known. This is documented by people way back in the 40s and 50s who wrote about why you don't use military bullets in hunting rifles. And of course now you can't use it because it's against the law in virtually all in all areas that I know of, except for varmints. But a military spire pointed Spitzer pointed bullet with a boat tail is shaped like a weather vane. It wants to, when it strikes tissue, it's not expanding and placing its heavy frontal area up front, which stays up front like a mushroom. What happens is it goes into tissue and it immediately starts to invert itself and fly base forward. So it travels into tissue and it turns and it inverts. Now, when you looked at this bullet, you'll notice that it had what? It has a wide open base, and that becomes basically a very, very big upset. That bullet right there becomes a big mushrooming mess. And I've spoken at length in other videos about I try to urge people to understand that high impact velocities on game animals such as deer, elk, or whatever it is that you're shooting, if the impact velocity is in excess of 29 to 3,000 feet per second, you're going to have to expect a lot of tissue damage, extraordinary tissue damage. And when you have a military bullet, which is traveling at M16 velocities of the era back in the 60s and early 70s, when you had 20-inch barrels, and even into the 80s when you had 20-inch barrels, and the velocities were 3,250 feet per second. Impact velocities at close ranges in Vietnam cause incredibly violent wounds, the same as you would expect if they were being shot on, say, on game. So that was the issue. It had nothing to do with tumbling. You know, people read what they see. They see these massive wounds, or they see a bullet which is, you know, it entered here and it ends up down in the thigh, and they say, well, it had to tumble, and it creates a lot of tissue damage on the way through. That's contrary to basic physics. Anything which strikes tissue, the very first thing that it wants to do, tissue is a resistance, and resistance slows things down. It doesn't speed them up. You can't, a bullet does not start spinning and spin fast because it strikes tissue. It's rotating and turning, weight forward, and where it ends up is where it ends up, but it's not spinning. A prop that strikes the ground on a plane that's landing without landing gear in the turf will spin fast for the first few revolutions, and then it slows down and then it stops, all bent up. But that's what happens. The momentum going through tissue slows something down rather than speeding it up. So they never tumbled in flight. They never tumbled in tissue. Now the Air Force found when they went to the extremes of the Arctic and they did some field testing, and I don't think that I've been looking. I don't see any documentation that they actually did any ballistic testing. And you got to kind of keep things in context. In the early 60s, when this was going on, ballistic chronographs simply did not. You know, I've got a crony here that I got back in the early 80s. It's got sky screens. It still works great. Sky screens weren't invented for another 10 years after the M16 was introduced officially. So they didn't have sky screens. It was a big deal to set up individual, like, you know, window screens at various ranges, and it was a big deal. And it was only done by ballistic laboratories and was generally done indoors. So I doubt that the military was actually doing that kind of testing. I think what was probably showing up was evidence of bullets being unstable in flight during standard field testing, I should say field exercises or training exercises with the airmen. And in such circumstances of, you know, in the dense air, cold air is denser than warm air, hot air. So in that cold, dense air, that affects the stability of a bullet. The rifling twist, watch my video on rifling twist. Rifling twist stabilizes a bullet by spinning it at a sufficient RPM to keep it point first and stable and keep it from yawing or from inverting and tumbling in flight. Once a bullet starts tumbling in flight or even yawing, it loses all accuracy. But a bullet which is being driven down the bore is given RPM which is sufficient to stabilize it. That RPM is influenced by two factors: the rate of twist and the speed of the bullet down that twist. So those two factors together influence the RPM. The RPM is essentially, while velocity peels off as it goes down range, as soon as the pressure drops to zero behind that bullet when it exits the barrel, velocity peels off at a constant and very fast rate as it travels through the air, and the bullet descends in both velocity and in its trajectory. RPM doesn't descend at the same rate. It's pretty well set. The RPM is pretty well set as it's traveling down the bore, and it slows down at a much slower. And this stuff is proven by photographic evidence and things and computers. They know that it slows down, but not proportionally to the rate that the velocity slows. But in any case, once a bullet is stabilized, we can say it's generally stabilized. Whether it's marginally stabilized is another issue. A bullet which is marginally stabilized in flight, it can, when it strikes tissue, it can invert itself more quickly, or if it strikes a twig, it can begin to upset more easily. So a faster twist is preferable over a slower twist if you're having such situations as dense air, which tends to slow the spinning rate, because basically it's a frictional drag around the bullet. So if dense air, which is cold air, dense air, and circumstances where you're in close to vegetation, things like that, it's preferable to keep the RPM up a little bit higher. So they went from a 14-inch twist to a 12-inch twist rifle. If that sounds like a very slow twist rifle compared to what you're talking about these days, this is a 7-inch twist barrel. You're right, but a 12-inch twist barrel is completely consistent with a 20-inch. That's basically spinning it more than adequately to stabilize a 55 grain military Spitzer boat tail bullet, full metal jacketed bullet. I've got a manual here, which is, I like to keep things contemporaneous with the time, and I enjoy reading some of these things from back in the day. This was written in 1971, back very shortly after the 223 was introduced for military use. And in this particular case, Sierra used a 20-inch Colt AR-15 to do their testing. And it had a 1 and 12-inch twist. Keep that in mind. That's equivalent to the A1. They were testing bullets all the way up to 63 grains with a 1 and 12 twist rifle, down to velocities as low as 2,600 feet per second. Hello, 1 and 12 twist, 63 grain semi-pointed bullet at 2,600 feet per second. They didn't report any lack of stability, and they didn't exclude any lower velocities. They were getting good accuracy with all these loads. So you can see it right here. We have 55 grain bullets down to 2,700 feet per second with some of the powders, and you can see very clearly that they were getting this is with this type of bullet here. They didn't have boat tails back. Sierra was not making boat tail bullets in this caliber back in the 70s. But that just goes to show you that 12-inch twist barrels are not slow. They're not slow twist barrels. As a matter of fact, if you take this shows you how fast it would have been, because a 222 Remington with a 26-inch barrel delivers virtually identical velocities. It delivers up to 3,100 feet per second, almost identical velocities with the same weight bullet, which is just, as a matter of fact, that's a 100 feet per second slower than a 20-inch barrel with a 223. And they're getting adequate stability at 2,400 feet per second with that, 2,600 feet per second with that particular bullet. Now, I know that that's stretching the envelope a little bit. I know that when you start driving velocities at that slower speed, that there's a tendency for that bullet to upset in flight at the slightest notion. So it's always good to keep the twist up a little bit. But another factor is that even with a 77 grain Match King hollow point boat tail with an extraordinary length of .992, that requires, Sierra says that requires an 8-inch twist barrel. Not a 7-inch twist barrel, an 8-inch twist barrel. A 7-inch twist barrel is an extremely fast twist barrel, and for whatever reason that the military feels that they have to have that, I think probably hails to the fact that they're using extraordinarily short barrels. Some of their M4s have got shorter barrels than 14-inch. And in those situations, what did I talk about? I talked about how forward velocity through the barrel is one of the two components that drives the RPM up. So they have to maintain a higher, I'm sure they have to maintain a higher higher spin rate to accompany the fact that they have a lower velocity going out of those barrels. But unless you're shooting an extraordinarily long bullet at long range, and would you use a 14-inch barrel for a 16-inch barrel for long range shooting? That would be contradictory to the common sense. No, you would use it at very least. You know, a national match shooter is always using a 20-inch barrel. Now, if I'm shooting 77 grain bullets out of that 20-inch match barrel, I'm probably not going to be bothering to use a 1 7/8 twist. I think that's a little bit too quick. I'd see what goes on. I'm fortunate to have Green Mountain Barrel Company right up the road from me, and I'll probably go up and talk to them about getting a little bit slower twist barrel for that gun, so that I can shoot bullets which are more standard jacket thickness. Because of all the jacketed bullets that I have a whole slew of 22 caliber bullets. There's only a couple of bullets that this gun will shoot accurately because the jackets are just too thin to sustain that vigorous twist. What happens with a extremely fast twist is nothing to do with the stability of the lightweight bullet. That's not what happens. What happens is that a very, very lightweight bullet is generally made with a jacket that's made for a 14-inch twist for a rate of spin which a 14-inch twist imparts with standard velocities. And when it's sped up with similar velocities at a very, very high rate, especially out of a 20-inch barrel, now you have a situation where the bullet is being rotated so fast that it starts to bloom. If it blooms too much, it just bursts and in flight, and it turns into a blue streak and it doesn't make it to the target. But in some situations, it just gets deformed in flight, and that deformation can basically loosen up your accuracy. So you have a bullet which is basically bulging in the middle as it's flying down range, and you have what I had with some testing that I did. I had very large groups. I had groups that were 4 or 5 inches in diameter. They were on the paper, and I knew that the loads were just showing me that something was going on that was good possibility, good potential, but I couldn't get any accuracy out of the bullet. So I called Sierra, and what they recommended was that I go to a 55 grain. They said that I should go to a 55 grain Sierra Spitzer boat tail, which is, if I can get my fingers on it, this is a 55 grain Sierra Spitzer boat tail right here. And that particular bullet, and not the Blitz, because the Blitz has a tendency to be too thin, and it causes problems with the bullet staying in its proper form. So you know that bullet there, the 55 grain boat tail Spitzer was made for 22-250 velocities, even though it's made for a 14-inch twist, typical 14-inch twist barrel. But it's made for those velocities and that stress. So when I did try that bullet, I was getting beautiful groups, less than an inch groups at 100 yards with this rifle with a scope. So we had these improvements up to the A1, and they made remarkably good changes to its performance. And it turned out to be a very fine fighting arm, a very fine combat piece. And it's such a good combat piece that it has lasted longer than any other combat firearm in the history of the United States of America, for that matter, throughout the world. We're talking about a firearm that's been used now by the military for over 55 years. And there's no indication that it's going to be losing ground anytime soon. Most of the complaints about the gun tend to be, from what I see, most of the complaints around the gun tend to be associated with the fact that people are just not getting the velocity that they want, and they're forgetting that velocity is all about barrel length. If you start cutting down barrel length and you want to have a short M4 style gun, you've got a gun which is absolutely ideal for, you know, going through doorways and around corners and things like that if you're an entry team. And you know, if you got a short collapsible stock and you're wearing, you know, body armor and things like that, all that is just ducky. But if you're looking to have, you know, if you're looking to have velocity, it's all about barrel length. You got to have barrel length. So you know, if you have a need for a short barrel, and you know, you want to play Army and you want to have an M4, then get yourself a short barrel. But if you want to have a gun that actually shoots at long range and keeps its velocity up and controls it, I would suggest that you get yourself a 20-inch barrel with a relaxed twist on the order of 1 in 9, 1 in 10. That'd be ideal. In fact, I'm thinking about even getting a 1 in 10 twist barrel for that, because that would improve. Basically I could shoot virtually every bullet that's made except for the 77 grain. The 77 grain bullet stands alone as a bullet which is just simply very, very long. But I'm not a national mass shooter, and there's no reason, it's not a bullet which is good for hunting, and there's no reason for me to have a 77 grain bullet unless I'm shooting, you know, extraordinarily long range. So the next variation in the gun was the fact that the carry handle was made detachable into a flat top configuration. You know, naturally I didn't talk about the forward assist handle. That was something that was added to assist when you have a dirty chamber or maybe moisture in the chamber and everything to push that round home. But that was something that the military eventually standardized throughout all the different armed forces. The Marines didn't want it for a great number of years. The Air Force didn't want it for a great number of years. It doesn't do anything negative to the gun other than add maybe an ounce or two of weight to it. But aside from that, it's just there. Myself, I don't care one way or the other. I never had an issue in my entire use of. I've shot thousands of rounds with this style gun. I've never once had to use a forward assist handle, ever. But you know, it's got improved sights. The military improved the sights tremendously by putting a fully adjustable rear sight, which is adjustable for windage and elevation, whereas before it was only elevation was only found in the front post. The front post was given its role as a rough adjustment now, and it also is a square post, which was suggested by the Marines. They found it had less reflective glare, and it provided a sharper image. And there are some other improvements to it. You know, there's a fence around the magazine release button, and that fence protects it from accidentally banging into that button and popping your magazine out. The improved buffer tube, this particular variation now, the A4 has got this texturized plastic. It's a heavier, longer stock than the one that I had in Vietnam. It has now the has a trap door for cleaning accessories. It's a little bit better profile butt pad. Still has this important weep hole here. Always keep that clean, because if that's not clean, the water can get trapped in. If you happen to be fording a river with your AR-15 and you get water in that buffer tube, if it can't drain out, you basically got a brick in there and the buffer can't come back against it. So this flat top configuration is nice. I can put a I'm not going to go over all the details about the improvements of the gun, because I think it's not essential. This here is this is the other option. You can put a scope right on top of that gun now. You can put a scope on it very, very easily. This is a nice arrangement. I picked $175 on sale. I got this nice VX1 3-9, and don't ever sneer at a VX1. It's exactly the same quality optics that you'll find on any loop-holed scope. The only thing that's different is just that some of the lens coatings are somewhat different. Fully functional, absolutely beautiful scope for $175. I don't normally prefer such a strong magnification. 3-9 is a little bit strong for any kind of woodland shooting. 3 power is really, you know, until you get out to 75 yards or so, you have no field of view. But it's adequate, and I use it mainly for load testing and evaluation. And if I want to use that as a coyote scope or something out in a big field, that's a nice way to go. So that's one of the things that you know, with a just simple couple of turns of a half inch wrench tightened down, I got myself a nice scope rifle, and I can take that off in a heartbeat with the same effort. So it's a nice arrangement. What I want to do is show you how to properly install a marksman shooting sling for your AR rifle. If you've got a fully stocked rifle, this is also just as easily, it can be used as a carry sling. I have a fully functional carry sling, but I can also use this as a shooter sling, and I'll show you how that's done and how to configure it. Because when you get one of these slings in the mail from whomever, it's not going to be the correct configuration. So let's come over to the bench and we'll do that. Now, as I say, when you get your sling in the mail, it's not going to be properly configured when it's all rolled up in a little plastic bag with an elastic band around it. You're going to have the buckles on the wrong side and the clips on the wrong side. So I want you to dismantle it completely and bring it down to these parts. Now this is your clamp, the wing clasp that holds the slings rigidly together. This is your D-ring and buttstock loop clip, and here's the tab, metal tab end on your sling. And the sewing on this is, I want you, this is very important. You want to take note that the sewing is just like on a seat belt. It's that X pattern, but you've got a tab on this. That's important, all important where that tab is going to be positioned with relation to the buckle. Now this is a 1 1/4 inch military issue sling. You've got to be very, very sure that you've got a 47-inch long sling. If you're ordering many slings on the market these days, they're still getting rid of a lot of shorter slings, which were made, they look exactly like this in many cases. They can be different colors, but they're shorter than 47 inches, and those were made for M1 Garands and M14s. And they're shorter because the distance, the spacing between the sling loops on the rifle are closer. So make sure you get a 47-inch sling, otherwise you're going to have nothing but a carry sling. So the first thing you want to do is you want to take your clip with the buckle upward. You want to slide the clip on with the clip up and out. Keep that in mind. The clip has got to be facing up and out opposite, and when it's sitting on strap, you want to have it in this position right here. Let me bring it up a little bit closer so you can see what's going on. You want to have the clip sitting with the mouth of it up and on the same side as this tab. Now, all you want to do is just simply pick up the clip like this, and you want to put the tab right through the buckle, thread it right through the buckle, both sides, just like this. See what I'm doing? I'm not extending any length at all. I'm just simply wrapping it right around that D-ring and threading that right through both sides of the buckle. So what I end up with is this picture right here. I've got the buckle and the buckle and the clip are in this situation here. The flush side of the clip is on the same side as the tab, and the buckle is on the same side as the clip, the open side of the clip. Okay, now once I've got that done, I want to take this clamp right here, this clasp, and that's got to go on with the finished side facing the same side as the buckle. So in other words, you've got the buckle on this side, you're going to have the finished side on the same side, and you also want to have the clamp facing outward. So again, it wants to be up and out. Just thread that straight on. Now this is key. Always keep in mind that you want to put your, no matter what kind of sling you're using, whether it's a 1907 leather sling, and if you're a national match shooter, you've got to use a leather sling. That's absolute. This is a field sling, a combat sling, and it's not intended to replace a 1907 national match sling. But you always feed down through your forward loop. That's imperative, and feed it down through your forward loop. Now, it has to go in underneath this wing, and also it must pass underneath these two wings right here. So if it doesn't pass underneath those two, there's nothing to guard against that. There's nothing to guard against that tab from pulling on this wing and loosening it up. And you don't want to be doing that. You want to make sure that you have those secured by sliding it underneath those 2 points right there. And I suggest that you have the tab no more than an inch or so away from your clasp. That gives you good stability. And after a while, you get to, you know what the distance is between your forward loop and your clamp for various shooting positions. You can mark those. You can mark this strap with a couple of threads of white thread or something like that, so that you can instantly spot those positions for quick positioning. And now, with this end here, just simply snap it right onto the bottom portion of the rifle. That's it. So now I'll show you how that works. So here it is fully installed. Now another way to adjust it is to get to know how much overage you have. In other words, how much distance you have from the butt plate to the end. So you can use that as a gauge too if you don't want to put a thread on there or tape it or something like that. You can simply take a measurement from your buttstock and get familiar with what works for the type of clothing that you're wearing also. So to use it as a carry sling, you've got it right there. That's a simple carry sling, but you can use that very, very quickly as a shooter's marksman's sling. And again, this is not acceptable for true competition. If you're going to get into true competition, you want to get a 1907 leather sling, high grade leather sling with the brass dogs on it and the two keepers. But this is good as a field expedient shooting sling. So to adjust it, this is the important part to remember. This is the part that's seldom explained. If you look at the buckle, the middle part of the buckle right there, that loop becomes your arm loop, and it's not the lower part of this sling right here. That's sometimes mistaken, and that causes a lot of issues because you can't possibly adjust it quickly that way. All you do is you feed the center of that buckle up, and it becomes your arm loop. Now, this is what you do. Position the gun on your hip, and simply secure it on your belt, and with your arm just like that, so you can secure the gun so it's not in jeopardy of falling down. And pull your loop wide open. As you look at it, you want to turn it one turn outside, one turn to the outside. In other words, basically towards my left shoulder. I want to turn it one turn outside. I'm looking down through that loop right now. And I just simply stuff my arm in until I'm all the way up, secured around the high part of my bicep. I want to get it as high as I can and tighten it down snugly. Now that I've got that secured around my left bicep, I've got myself a good solid support for that rifle for various positions, whether I'm shooting prone, sitting, kneeling, or whatever. Now it's totally against the regulations, the rules, the shooting rules. You'll be disqualified if anybody sees you doing this for the standing offhand position, because this is considered to be illegal. Why is it illegal? Because it provides good stability. But if you can imagine, this would work whether I'm shooting prone, and prone I may have my arm out a little bit farther and tighten up the sling a little bit more, always keeping the elbow underneath the gun. I apologize. I wanted to get out and do some serious shooting, but life got seriously in the way of me doing any videos. I was busy building a cabinet for my Knights of Columbus Council, doing some volunteer driving, taking people to medical appointments and things like that. So I just haven't been doing any videos as I wanted to do, and so it's going to have to wait. But I do want to get out on the shooting mat and show you how to do some various positions. But essentially, if you're shooting prone and your elbow's on the ground, you want this to be fully under the rifle so that it's not being splayed out. And this gives you full support. And essentially, this is what you do also if you're shooting offhand. You want to give yourself full support against your belly, and you want to let your, this is not something you do for aesthetics. Let your belly stick out, your backbone curve out toward your hips. You basically lock your hips in the out position with your feet hip width apart, not shoulder width, but hip width apart. You don't want to be standing on the inside of your balls of your feet. You want to be, basically, you want to be supported right underneath your hips, straight up and down. And in that position there, you're steady, and allow this elbow to just drop and relax it. You don't want to force it into any uneasy configuration. Your stock can be, this is not a rifle that requires heavy support such as a 30 caliber rifle where you get a lot of recoil. You can bounce this thing off your chin and it's not going to hurt you. So let it just relax. Let your arm relax. Get the shoulder, get the butt stock up high on the shoulder, and just simply position yourself where you're comfortable. And watch my marksmanship videos, the earlier ones that I did about body position, natural body position things. But that's how you set up your shooting sling. When you want to go back to a carry sling, it's just as simple as that. You just snap that back into position. There you go. You're back to a standard carry sling. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy your AR-15, and if you can, get out and shoot as often as you can. We got to kill off some of these coyotes out there. They're really bad. They're killing all our small game and a lot of the fawns, the deer. So we've got to get after them. So have fun doing that, and God bless.